Right. Okay, perfect. Right. So this is kind of an more of an intro talk to APM, and I'll give you kind of the context of these sorts of APM systems and where they come from, and we'll also go through where I've used them and what I would do differently, basically, right? What would I think of if I were to use them now? First off, who am I? So I'm a community engineer. I'm in developer relations. I work for Elastic. Previously, I used to run a small consultancy with a few of my British friends. And yeah, I'm a web developer. I manage servers mostly by hand through almost half of my life now, which is a bit weird. Yeah, that's my background. So operations, web development, Python and Ruby developer, and a little bit of JavaScript. So what's APM? So APM refers to application performance monitoring. There we go. So it's the way that basically APM is like a really in-depth look at your application. Or it's like an X-ray of your app, a white box that looks directly into your app and shows you which line of code is slower, which line of code is being called. It also collects errors from your app. So it just hooks its tendrils deep inside your application and shows you information. That's what the thing is. More generally, though, for me, APM is a search problem. So it's a cognitive problem. Okay, so this is the APM system, right? So the important thing, so you got how many requests per minute, of course. An interesting thing, if you haven't seen one of these before, is this. So you immediately get into what are the metrics I should be looking at and what do they mean. Because a system like this can easily be fairly useless as well. So you can look at it and be like, oh, it's lots of pretty graphs. That's what we used to do when we had lots of server metrics. We just do more and more and more graphs, like 30 graphs on a page. It's great, amazing. The more graphs, the better. But so obviously, here we try to actually distill it, and so do all the vendors, right? They try to distill it to what's actually useful. So this is one example that I always like to point out. It's a very basic metric. How long does it take for a server to answer a transaction, to fulfill a transaction? You got the average, 100 milliseconds, and then you got these 95th and 99th. Those are the percentiles. So 95th percentile and 99th percentile. And what they mean is 95% of your users, and you take them as a whole, they experience the site like that. 99% of your users, they experience it like that, right, to put it simply. So that's what you're seeing there is this clearly a 5 times difference, right? So if you just measure the average, you're not really going to see maybe the frustrations that your users are going through. I mean, half a second's all right, but I mean, typically websites will do something like 10 times this, and then 1 second, 5 seconds is a big difference, right? So you've got to be careful what metrics you're measuring. Right, and then you've got pretty much all APM systems will have something like this, and you got your transactions. You can order them in many ways. So Elastic has chosen to do this impact thing. So impact's kind of a composite metric. Obviously, it's how long it takes. The longer, the bigger the impact. But it's also the number of calls and the CPU and RAM and all the resources that are being used. So this is just a composite thing, and you can order it by that. So it essentially is trying to tell you what's slowest, right? Another thing it does is federated error collection. This is super useful. Like, I love this when we'll get to the case studies later. Okay, for time? Yeah. We'll get the case studies. But yeah, so I really loved, because they previously just have these logs and they scroll past errors. And even if you collect all your logs in one place, you still got like thousands of errors scrolling through potentially, like during an actual problem in production. And this groups them. All the vendors do this, right? They all group them like this. This is amazing because it shows you when the last one occurred. You can really easily identify a problem by that. And it shows you how many are occurring. And if you limit it, see it says up there last 24 hours. Limit it to last 30 minutes, and you could have your production error narrowed down just by clicking 2 buttons on the interface. It's great. And if you click that, it will give you a stack trace as well. Hang around there that much. And then it gives you also those metrics that you know. So the process, the CPU, the memory. Okay. Right. So then the next thing I want to show you is what it does. So this is just the overview, right? So the next thing that it does is this part. So this is the breakdown of, so this kind of your stack trace visualized, right? And I'll show you a couple of different things. So here what we have is this blue purplish color is it says that they are op beans RUM. RUM means real user monitoring, and pretty much all modern APM vendors have this. This is JavaScript. If you have React, Angular, whatever, that's that. So this is monitoring when the user hits the JS. That's what that's monitoring. And look what it's doing afterwards, right? How long does it take to make connection to the server, blah, blah, blah. All right, so now we're on the back end. So now it's looking at the back end and how long that's taking. And if I click here, this is a stack trace from the back end, right? So this is the function that's being called exactly. And you see it's working hard, it's sleeping randomly in this example application. And you can even see the entire library code that's being called line by line. It's directly in your browser, which is super useful. Of course, you can naturally see this in your IDE, but it's very different to see exactly the lines that are being called in production. This is incredibly useful. This is a super basic feature. Literally everyone has this, and yet this is probably the most useful one. And of course, it tells you how long it took, like what percentage time on the transaction, and literally how long it took in milliseconds or seconds. So then the other interesting thing here is you see the different colors. You got blue and you got green. Right? So far we know blue is the front end, green is the back end. But here we got something else that's interesting. So you got another, so this is going back to JavaScript, right? This is going to Python again, right, in green. Now Python is called a beans, called a node service, so Node.js in purple, royal purple. And Node.js is called a Ruby service in red, okay? So this is what this is called. This whole thing is called distributed tracing. It's a feature that allows you, when the request comes in at the front end, and it tags the request with a magic number, and it goes through all of your backend using that magic number, and that allows it to track the request through the entire system that you have. So this is microservice architecture, or just normal sensible services architecture with a couple of services, right? And this allows you to track the requests through that. Otherwise, you only end up with front end, back end kind of thing, or even just back end. All right, so move on to this part. So here, I don't know how many of you know Python, but basically you got, in a lot of web apps, you'll have background jobs. You want to do something in batch, right? Okay, so requests over there that I just click is web requests. We all know what those are. Celery there is not a vegetable. It's the background jobs library that's very popular in Python. So basically, this allows you to track your background jobs as well. So here, instead of like requests per minute, it's got failures per minute and successes per minute. So like, how are they failing and succeeding? And of course, how long they're taking. So same deal, basically. But that's great because you can monitoring background tasks. Like it's just such a pain. I wrote a system trying to do this, and it was not fun. Right, so here we've got, yes, okay. So just to show you, it can also do SQL queries. So here we got the actual query that's being called, and here we got, this is the, don't know why this is called a library frame. This is part of the application. We've got the exact line that calls that SQL query. You got the exact SQL query. You got how long it took. You got the type as Postgres. And you've got the percentage time it took from the transaction. I mean, this is great just on its own as well, because as an operator, like either a software developer who's looking after an app or an ops person who's maintaining an app, you are overloaded with information. There is a ton of information, and you don't necessarily know which bits to relate together to fix it when it wakes you up at 3 a.m. and when your pager goes off. So for me, it's narrowing down that field of information, i.e. search, for a problem. So that's kind of fundamentally what it is, and we'll come back to this later. And we'll very quickly go over kind of the monitoring evolution of, at least as I experienced it, and as I think other web devs have experienced it as well. So in the beginning, we just had logs. This is one application. This happens to be an ancient version of Elasticsearch, outputting some logs, right? We're all familiar with that. That's the stream of what is happening, diagnostic information, into a text file. And then you add a web server, Nginx, you add a firewall, you add your actual application, right? And you have your data store. So you add a few more things, and this is still manageable, right? Maybe you run this on a beefier machine, and it still works. You can go in, you know where the logs are, you remember them, you have the intuition to know where they are, and you know that you can relate different events by timestamp to understand how your production system works, right? Then you add a couple more application servers, you add a couple more data store servers, you add a couple more web servers, like a few more Nginx instances, and it's, it starts getting a little bit hairy at this point. And so this is where we started looking for different solutions as a sector, because I actually ran a system like this without any any kind of log collection or federation or anything like this. I just literally logged in and looked at logs, even though we had 11 servers, most because I didn't need to log into all of them. And it's because it's like the boiling frog, right? You just, you get used to it. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's fine, I don't feel any worse. I don't, at any of these steps. And until, one day something happens and it takes you 2 days to debug a problem in production, and you're not sure what's going on, and it's a client, and you're a small agency, so that's not so nice. So you realize you got to do something, and I guess the sector overall realized they have to do something, and that's where federation comes in. So by federation, what I mean is we just take the stuff that we used to have. So we're talking about logs. So you take the logs and you send them to one place, to one server or one whatever it is. And the beggar's version of this is that you send them all to your computer. So you just rsync the logs from all the machines into one folder, and you have a trusty script that does it, and then you know how to grep them. And that's it, right? That's also federation. That's totally valid. And I've done that too. And then you have metrics. So metrics, by that I just means kind of application environment, where the app runs in, or you call it server environment. So this is just CPU and RAM and how much the basic resources each process is taking up. And you collect this in one place. And you got systems like Prometheus with Grafana on top, right, that allow you to view this stuff, these metrics. And there's even older stuff like Nagios. That's a 17-year-old project that does this, right? So this is all like fairly solid, and we know all this. So then afterwards, so the thing with these systems is that you're kind of sitting on the outside, right? That was always the problem. You got this black box, your application, and it's running in a server, and you know what's going on with the server, you don't know what's going on inside the application, or at least that's how it used to be. It's certainly how I used to work. So you kind of, so hence the analogy, right? You had the watch people, the logs and the metrics or the watch, sorry, or the watch people, but you want a closer look, a look inside. And you actually want, if you think about it, what you really want is a better intuitive understanding of what happens in production, so that when you are woken up at 3 a.m. or when you have to answer a difficult question during a stand-up or like a meeting with a client, you know what to say. When they say, why did this happen, you know what to say. Like, you know the sequence of events that actually occurred in production. You're not just guessing from development, you're reproducing the problem and then guessing. That works a lot of the time, and when it doesn't work, it just fails really badly as a diagnostic technique. So here is where I disappoint you a little bit. APM is not that silver bullet, so it's not the principal investigator, but I promised you one, so I will give you a principal investigator at the end. it's not that, but we are a lot closer than before. As I said, it's the white box, right? So now we go past the server into the application itself. So just for curiosity's sake here, so we've got quite a history, and actually APM is not really a web thing because it's application performance monitoring. You can monitor the performance of all sorts of applications. So Symantec, if any of you remember them, Norton Antivirus, they used to make an APM product, and so did Hewlett-Packard, and so did Dell. But the more, I guess, relevant part for this presentation are those here. So you have these names like Dynatrace, AppDynamics, and New Relic, and they're fairly famous vendors. And this chart is missing some that I would say are fairly relevant as well. Your Datadog and Honeycomb and Elastic, who I work for as of last year, are also an APM vendor. And there are many others actually. So this is quite a big space. Like if a company like Elastic decided to get into it, I guess they thought it was worth at least millions or hundreds of millions or more. So this is and there is a reason why it's so big, because this sort of tool, and this is kind of what I want to tell you, right? This sort of tool is exactly, there is nothing quite like it. Like if you've not used an APM system before, my goal is to tell you, you should use something. You don't have to use Elastic stuff, but you use something, because it won't change your life, but it will change your professional life, right? If you're looking after live systems. It's really made a big difference to me. So I want to show you very quickly what that actually is, right? I want to show you an APM system. This is the one that Elastic makes. So I need to move the window. Good enough. I'll just do that. All right, so most of this is open source, and all of it is free to use, so I'm not showing you anything you need to pay for at any point in this presentation, including for commercial use. So if you're a company, you can just install this, run it yourselves, etc. It's fine. You don't need to pay us anything, right? And literally all vendors have this, again, especially for SQL. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. All right, so let's see if we can. This is my short demo. Okay, to do this the hard way. You go away. All right, okay. All right, so just to recap, an APM system's main job is to show you slow and hungry transactions. Hence, what now? All right, I'll stop holding this up. I don't know, I zjeđe my cable, wait.
There you go.
For fuck's sake. Okay. It's all right. Where's the bloody window? No, okay. All right, so slow and hungry transactions, right? Okay, right. So there are a few other things that I want to mention. You've got some open collaboration efforts. You've got open tracing and open census. I'm sure there'll be many others. Some are spearheaded by Google and their friends, some by other people. Just something to keep in mind that there are a lot of APM systems, a lot of metrics collection systems. Something that you might want to think about when selecting one is this system or vendor or whatever it is participating in some kind of collaborative effort? And does that impact your work? So check for that. Check for what collaborations they're engaged in. And it's also a bit of a test for maturity, I guess, right? Because you can only afford to do this kind of stuff if you got your own house in order. So as I was saying, it can totally remain a useless collection of graphs. So how do you actually make it useful? Just like any other system, I'm afraid there's not really any silver bullet to it. You have to think, you kind of have to basically be intentional. You have to think, reflect, and focus on what's actually helpful to you. And so what are your problems specifically? What are you trying to solve? Is this system doing it for you? If not, move on. to another one. Honeycomb.io is a vendor that's interested, it's closed source commercial, but it's interesting. They think more about the cognitive load of the operator. They seem to be like thinking about, okay, what is the person, what habits is the person using our system building? What mental habits are they building? So they're thinking kind of more on that cognitive processing side. So I recommend just checking it out. They've just got interesting ideas. I'm not saying best or worst here. I don't know the other vendors as well, so it wouldn't be fair. So I'll, how much time do I actually have?
10 minutes.
Ah, okay. Oh. Okay, surprisingly. So.
Do you have time for Q&A?
No. Right, so I got, because I promised in the description, I'll give you a couple of case studies, right? So there are 2 clients that I picked for this. One was a non-profit client. They were using New Relic Lite, which is, if you've used it, is the free version. Well, it used to be at least. Now I don't know. It was a year or so ago. It's great, right? I mean, New Relic is one of the established players. They got good systems, but only 24 hours retention of your data, right? That made retrospectives rather difficult if the thing fell over on Saturday and you kind of fix it, but then you want to, get back to it on Monday. Obviously, they do this so you pay them, totally reasonable. The problem was that the nonprofit didn't want to pay for New Relic, professional of any kind. Being a nonprofit, I guess not too surprising. So the issue here is that we should, because we kept with it for like years, we should have sat down 6 months, 12 months after we started New Relic and decided, look, this was amazing step up from nothing, from no APM, just logs and basic metrics. It was amazing and it helped us so much. But what problems were we trying to solve? Because we had some really complicated issues only in production, so that's what we were trying to solve when we installed it. Did we solve them? If not, then move on, right? So we solved a whole bunch of problems, but then obviously the retrospective thing didn't really work out, and then I had somebody to also train, and then he couldn't always be there when things went, on fire. So I needed that data. So what I should have done is thought, okay, well, let's look for an alternative a bit harder than I looked, and let's invest the time to move. Because actually moving between these, it takes a bit of time, but I mean, with some luck, you might be able to do it in a couple of days or a week. It's worth doing if you can solve more problems, like retrospectives in this case. Yes, basically should have tried other vendors earlier. We should have specifically tried the company that Elastic bought and then open sourced to become the thing I just showed you. Because they had a commercial service for like 6 years. They were cheaper. We should have gone with them. We weren't using most of New Relic's advanced features. So even if the nonprofit didn't want to pay, we should have just moved to a more basic system that still did the job. So yeah, think about what you actually need from your vendors. This is another case study, is a Ruby case study. So they were still using New Relic Lite, and something that Reagan that tracks errors specifically. I don't know if they're even still alive as a company. There are a lot of those as well. Only 24-hour retention, still the money was a problem. This one, it was better than nothing, but we also wasted time going down rabbit holes that turned out to not be the actual problem. I can't really tell you what the difference was between the nonprofit and this. I think it was mostly just architecture, and that this involved features that only New Relic Professional had. Like database analysis is just not in the free version to that extent. So that's why we wasted time. We were like, oh, the Ruby code is slow. Or, actually it was the database when it's under specific load, right? And so you kind of get lost. So we should have paid, and really here, like they were paying us like $450 a day. That was our rate. And I mean, I would have actually been happy to sacrifice one of my billable days to work with the professional version from that vendor or any other vendor for the month, because it would have made my job so much nicer. So yeah, I kind of really encourage you to actually use these and make people think about the value there. And so that's, that's what I want to get through to you. So be intentional. Think about why you're okay. What I mean by be intentional. Sit down with just by yourselves first, just your tech team, and then sit down with your business stakeholders separately. Why did you install APM in the first place? What are they resolved? Do you have other problems now? Can you resolve them with this system? Do you need to buy more? Do you need to switch to another vendor? Do you need to run something yourself? Do you need to add metrics? Like, are you doing federated logging and federated metrics collection? Are you missing that and only using APM? What is it? Just think through your problems. This is a good one, I think. Do you keep learning something unexpected? Because an APM system is a white box view, an X-ray into your app. You should be teaching you stuff at least once, twice a month. That's a good rate for me, and that did keep happening. Production surprised me, of course, my own code, but the system told me not, when things are on fire. I could actually see it. And yeah, think about where you want to go next, and then sit down with your business stakeholders and go through these same questions. So everyone is testing in production, whether you want it or not, because as soon as you put something in production, you are testing in production, so to speak. This is an important point that I wish I had thought of when I was still doing it with these clients. Log into these systems more often than just when stuff's on fire. You need to know when things are normal so that you have a feeling for what might be abnormal when everything looks abnormal. Because otherwise, if you only log in when there are errors, that's your normal state. You have no baseline. You have nothing to calibrate to. So try to log in and just look at what your system is doing. Maybe make it a habit. I don't know. There are some vendors who are trying to make this easier. And, so I also said that I'd give you an approach. And this is what I do, right? So write down the problems. Write down business value, basically. So the literal value of solving them. Which can be really hard to calculate, but the attempt to calculate it is a useful exercise. Then value of your dev time. So if your engineers are spending 2 days more, 3 days more a month tracking down really difficult problems, that's quite expensive, as I'm sure you know. And there's also creativity and happiness. This is one of the most, kind of the worst things that contributed to my eventual burnout, is having to deal with these systems. And just doing the grunt work of tracking down really difficult problems that just seem to have no answer. And that matters for the happiness of your people and how creative they are with the rest of their work. So there is value as a whole there for your devs. Not only from your devs, but for your devs. Look at the existing skills in your team and at the tech stuff. So what languages are supported by the NPM vendor? Obviously, if it doesn't support Java and you're a Java shop, and the price, of course. Push the price, but do it in a matrix together with the other stuff. And then finally, I picked 3 vendors just to then narrow down to 1, just to force myself not to go with the first thing because I'm tired of researching. That's what that's for. So that's my kind of approach to it. And then finally, because I promised you a principal investigator, or a private investigator, a detective. This is Inspector Gadget, for those of you who recognize him. So the private investigator is you. It's always been you. When we had logs, when we had federated logging, and when we had metrics and Nagios and then Prometheus, and now when we have 1,000 APM systems, you are the person who brings it together, who builds an intuition of what a normal life system looks like, who builds intuition of what the problem might be, and who goes in to fix it, and who is on call, right? So by all definitions, you are the investigator. These are just